In January 1968, the Viet Cong launched a surprise attack on South Vietnam and the US Army. It became known as the Tet Offensive. It was supposed to trigger an insurrection in the South, but that never materialized. What did happen was a meltdown in American public opinion. The Pentagon came under unprecedented criticism for its optimistic assessment of the course of the Vietnam War. A credibility gap opened up between the then US President Lyndon B. Johnson and Americans. LBJ himself lost faith in the way his top general was fighting in Vietnam and replaced him. In 1968, Columbia University in New York became the epicenter of the anti-war protest, spurred on by the university's ties to the defense industry. Students occupied 5 buildings and took its dean, Henry Coleman, hostage for 36 hours. The police were called in. There were hundreds of student arrests, injuries, a strike, and then the resignation of Columbia's president, Grayson Kirk. Anti-war protests reached a climax outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and were later seen as one of the reasons for the election of the Republican Richard Nixon as president. Meanwhile, the anti-war protests spread like wildfire to Europe, first to West Berlin and then to Paris, where in May 1968 a worker and student revolt triggered 10 weeks of street battles. At one point, the Élysée lost its nerve and French President Charles de Gaulle scuttled to Germany. The next day, 500,000 workers marched through Paris chanting "Adieu de Gaulle." Does all this sound familiar? There is a major student revolt going on in US campuses right now over Joe Biden's backing of Israel's war in Gaza. Once again, Columbia University is its epicenter. Last night, students occupied Hamilton Hall, and after the university started suspending more students. This building was occupied by protests in 1968. The protests have spread to 30 other universities and colleges. At the conservative Ivy League Yale, students are demanding the university divest from all weapons manufacturing companies contributing to Israel's assault on Palestine. Yale has exchange students with 7 Israeli universities. Harvard has programs with 3 of these universities, while Columbia has relations with 4 of them. As in 1968, many of these protests have been met by police violence. Over 900 students have been arrested since the first clashes at Columbia over 2 weeks ago. They have also spread to Britain and to Europe. At Trinity College, Cambridge, the portrait of Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary responsible for a statement recognising the right of Jews to a homeland in Palestine, was defaced and slashed before being removed by the university. London has just seen its 13th national demonstration since the war began. The protests against the war in Gaza, in their persistence and size, are only matched by the million-plus demonstration against Tony Blair's decision to invade Iraq, which in 2003 was the biggest of its kind. In 1968, the targets were the Pentagon and de Gaulle and his repressive paternalism. Today's targets of the anti-war movement is Israel, the pro-Israel lobby, and its chief armourers, America, Britain and Germany. Spearheading the revolt against Zionism is a new generation of Jew who is turning up in increasing numbers at these protests. The Gaza war is causing an unprecedented debate among Jewry, with leading intellectuals like the Canadian journalist and activist Naomi Klein arguing that Zionism is, and I quote, a false idol that has taken the idea of the promised land and turned it into a deed of sale for a militaristic ethno-state. These events will not be without their consequences. The first is that for the first time in history, Gaza, both its people and its militias and fighters, are displaying a determination to stand and fight, which the PLO and Yasser Arafat never showed. Palestinians now have a leadership which will not give up its major demand and which commands their respect. The second consequence is that a new generation is coming of age in America, the only country that can stop this conflict by withdrawing its military, political and economic support for Israel. It is still the only country that Israel listens to and takes seriously. The Jews amongst this generation are horrified by what is being done in their name, horrified by how their religion has been morphed into an apology for ethnic cleansing, horrified by how their proud and painful heritage has been reduced into a license to kill, horrified by the power exerted by Israel over the US Congress, the UK Parliament and every mainstream party in Europe. Jews are challenging the claim that Zionism owns their narrative. For their pains, they are accused by their own community of being traitors. They're called kapos. This is the word the Jews assigned to the Nazi SS to supervise forced labour were given. They're called self-hating or simply animals. But for me, they are the biggest single source of hope in this bleak landscape.